What's up, friends? Welcome back for another haul video, but this time it's a little bit different because it is exclusively a bunch of vinyl records that I've picked up recently and ordered, and so I'm really excited to get into it. There's quite a bit. I've been saving them up for a little while, just like I did with all the packages from the last haul that I did, just so that I could have a lot to show all of you in this video. But there's going to be quite a few soundtracks for shows and movies, or probably just movies, I think, but just to keep it with the theme, obviously, of movies and shows with the channel. But there's going to be a wide variety of different ones in this, and so hopefully there will be some interesting ones that you all will appreciate, and I'll try and mention a few things about each one that I show. But I am planning later in the year to do a full vinyl record collection and go more in depth individually with them and show the different color variants and the actual records themselves. And so I won't go into all that in this video, but hopefully you all enjoy watching along. And so without further ado, let's dig in. All right, the very first one I've got here is The Weeknd's most recent album, Dawn FM, and I went for this variant that was available on his site because I preferred it over the regular cover that they use. Not that there's anything wrong with it, I just thought this one looked really cool, like the vibe of it. But it's a really cool album listen from start to finish. It's kind of one whole cohesive unit, and so it's really fun that way. But I'm a big fan of The Weeknd, so happy to have this. Okay, the next item here we've got is a bit more of a hefty one. It is the 4LP version of Run the Jewels 4, and this album goes hard because from start to finish it's just banger after banger. The writing is insanely good on this album, and it was actually my first interaction with Run the Jewels, and I was instantly hooked by their work. And so I've been checking out a lot more of their stuff recently and been really enjoying it, and so I'll probably have another few Run the Jewels albums in my collection before it's all said and done. And I guess I should be showing you the backs of these as well. This is the back of the Dawn FM edition that I got, and then this is the back of RTJ4. And the next album I got could not be farther from the one I just pulled out, but it is Carly Rae Jepsen, Emotion. And I always remembered her just from Call Me Maybe, but when I actually started listening to more of her work, she has a lot of good songs that I really enjoy, and this album in particular is my favorite from her so far, and so I was excited to add this one. Okay, this next one we've got is our first soundtrack of the bunch. It's for a video game this time, which is Dead by Daylight. This is the first volume, and the second volume is actually coming out later this year on the second part of Record Store Day in June. But I am a huge fan of this game. I've put a ton of hours into it with friends and just for fun, and the soundtrack is really great as well. I've listened to it a bunch outside of playing, and so I was happy to add this one. I bought this one off Discogs though because I missed the original release, but either way still ended up in my collection. The next one is one I'm so stoked to have because so far it is my favorite album of the year, which is Grabbit's Time Isn't Real. And he is one of my favorite artists right now, and this album I feel like is some of his best work from start to finish. I love every single song so much on this album. It'd be impossible to choose a favorite, but some I would recommend are Pigs in the Sky, R.I.P., Teleport, and Come Down, and 87 Seconds, pretty much every song on the album. And it's hard to just kind of slap a genre on this because he covers so many different ones and they all kind of blend together, but it's a bit of a mix of EDM and rap and a little bit of pop and rock thrown in there as well, and so it's just really satisfying overall to listen to. Already listened to the whole album several times since it released earlier this year, and so really happy to have this one. And now we have another soundtrack, this time for a movie, one of my favorite films of all time, in Prisoners, and of course by the great composer Johan Johansson. And I missed the initial release of this whenever it happened, and I was worried I was gonna have to pay some stupid prices online picking it up secondhand, but luckily they repressed it recently, and so I had to jump on this edition to finally have it. Love the soundtrack, love the movie. We've got another big edition now. This is Hayley Williams' solo work, a combination of both Pedals for Armor and Flowers for Vases, and I love Paramore, loved them for quite a few years, and so I was excited to check out her solo work that she was doing in the meantime while they were taking a bit of a break. And I really love both of the albums, but in particular her most recent one, Flowers for Vases, really moved me. I usually don't get emotional listening to music, but I was really feeling it while listening to that album. It's really deep, really heavy stuff, but she's such an amazing artist, and so I was glad that I was able to pick up the dual edition, having both of those albums. Next up is an album from Chromatic's Night Drive, and I was initially put onto this because of the Drive soundtrack with Tick of the Clock, which is by them. That's one of my favorite portions of the soundtrack, and so I wanted to see what else they had put out, the band, and I really loved this album overall, and so I had to pick this one up. Very excited about these next two albums, which are from another one of my favorite artists, which is Oh Wonder. The first one we've got here is Ultralife, and they are a recently husband and wife duo, but their music is fantastic. Highly recommend checking them out if you haven't listened to them before. And then we also have No One Else Can Wear Your Crown, which has some of my favorite songs by them. Hallelujah is probably my favorite overall song by them, although it's very difficult to choose. There's so many that are right close to each other, and I Wish I Never Met You is also an absolute banger. We have another album here resulting from my love of the Drive soundtrack, which is Kavinsky. Outrun probably has the most popular song from the Drive soundtrack on there, with Night Call, such a fantastic song. Next we have an excellent album from Odessa, A Moment Apart. This has some of my favorite songs by them on it, and I love the cover art as well. And maybe my favorite song on the album, it's hard to choose, but is the It's Only VIP remix on the deluxe edition. But the deluxe edition vinyls go for ridiculous prices, and I don't love the song enough to purchase those, and so maybe one day someone will sell them for cheap and I'll pick it up, but for now, very satisfied with the regular version. Well, it wasn't long before they showed up again, but I've got another Oh Wonder album here. This is their self-titled album with some amazing songs on it as well. I'm a fan of the whole album, obviously, because I purchased it, but I especially love All We Do and Technicolor Beat just off the top of my head. Those are some of their more popular ones from the album, but there's a lot of gems in there. We're back on the soundtrack train again, this time with The Night House, a movie that really flew under the radar. It's a phenomenal horror film that came out recently, starring Rebecca Hall. I really recommend it, especially if you enjoy horror films. There's so much to love there. It's a really creative story, and the execution is really fun, but the soundtrack by Ben Lovett is awesome. He's done a couple soundtracks I really love, so happy to have this one from Mondo. Alright, we've got a big drop now from one particular group. I'm a big fan of 21 Pilots. I've loved their music for quite a few years. Obviously, Blurry Face being kind of their major breakout hit album that really put them on the map. There's so many hits on this. Then we've got Trench next up, and I haven't been disappointed by any of their albums so far, which is rare for an artist to consistently entertain me with all of their work, and so I'm really looking forward to what they put out next, and hopefully I'll enjoy that too. But here is their most recent work with Scaled and Icy, which I also really enjoy. This is the smallest of the bunch. I think this one's just a single LP. And then lastly, the album that first got me into 21 Pilots, which is Vessel. In particular, Car Radio is a song that I blasted a ton way back in 2014, and so glad to finally have it and it come full circle to vinyl in my collection. Next, we've got a very exciting one. It's the recent Mr. Suicide Sheep release, which, if you aren't familiar, they are a music channel that's been around for a very long time, and I was especially excited for this release which just has a plain white background, but I'm sure it gets very interesting when you open it up. It's a box set, not just a regular LP, but as a lot of you may already know, Eden is my favorite artist. However, some of his earliest works are not available on vinyl at all, so I've just been patiently waiting for that to pop up at some point, including my favorite song on that album, which is my favorite song of his in general, which is Wake Up, and luckily that is contained in this set. I was so happy to see that it was finally getting released on a vinyl in general, regardless of who put it out, but there's a bunch of other songs I love in this set as well, and so it was a no-brainer to pick this one up. And wouldn't you know it, we've got another Oh Wonder album here, this time with their most recent release, 22 Break, and their 22 Make, the companion album to this, currently on pre-order. But I was a big fan of this, and you may be wondering, if you like some of these artists so much, why are you only just now getting the vinyls when some of them have been out for years? And the answer to that is I mainly collected soundtracks on vinyl for the first several years of me picking them up, but recently, over the past year, I've been branching out into all genres of music that I enjoy, just because I've really grown to love the format, and so it's been fun going back through and revisiting some artists who I haven't listened to in years and rediscovering my love for them. Oh Wonder is not one of those, though. I pretty often listen to them. Next, we have the album that I was maybe most excited to get out of this whole bunch, which is the Midnight Endless Summer. I love every single one of their songs, and Endless Summer is my favorite album by them, and so I was so excited to get this one, and luckily my favorite album by them is actually easy to get. Their other albums, at least their original 3, are almost impossible to get, and so maybe one day I will get to add those to the collection, but I believe I also have another album coming from them here in a second, but they are Synthwave, capturing that kind of 80s feel, and so if you're a big fan of that genre and you haven't listened to the Midnight, then I could not recommend them more. Next up, we've got Church's Love Is Dead, and I really enjoy a lot of Church's songs individually, but I'd never really listened to their albums from start to finish before, but I've been going through them over the past couple months, and they are just such a consistently solid group. I've got several of their albums now, and hopefully I'll be getting some more soon, but cannot wait to play this. Alright, now we've got the Try Not to Dance challenge with Bruno Mars 24K Magic. This album is super fun. A lot of great songs on there, obviously the biggest being 24K Magic, and that's what I like, but I enjoy all the other songs as well, so can't wait to put this on. Okay, we've got a pretty major classic here now with Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood. Pretty much every song on this album is an absolute headbanger, but my favorite is definitely Kickstart My Heart. That one is just pure adrenaline. I love that song, but as you can probably see by this point, I do not box in my music tastes at all. It encompasses pretty much every genre, and so I've got something for pretty much every potential mood I could have. Alright, now we've got a must-have soundtrack here, especially for probably a lot of you who've been following the channel for a while. It's the Breaking Bad score, and I believe this was listed as mint or near mint on Discogs, but if you can tell, clearly not mint in any way on a couple of these edges, but hopefully the discs play fine. That's really all that matters. Such a great soundtrack though. Dave Porter is a mastermind with music, obviously killing it again with Better Call Saul. Season 6 soundtrack has been phenomenal so far, and so really looking forward to playing this. And as predicted, we've got another album here from The Midnight, their most recent horror show. I really enjoyed this album, and the artwork is fantastic as well, and I cannot wait for their new album coming out later this year. Up next, we have probably my favorite Disturbed album, a classic, 10,000 Fists. Amazing artwork on this one, and just so many fantastic songs. Obviously, it has one of their most popular songs ever with Stricken, which I believe was on a Guitar Hero, one of the early ones, but I also love, obviously, 10,000 Fists, the song itself, but Decadence is one of my favorites as well. It was the first Disturbed song I ever heard. It was in a Need for Speed or some sort of car racing game, and it was part of the soundtrack, and after I heard it, I had to look up the band. But Land of Confusion is also another favorite of mine, and so really happy to have this album. Getting into some more movie soundtracks again, we've got Synchronic, one of Moorhead and Benson's films, which if you've been watching Moon Knight, they were part of the directing team for that. But the film itself is decent, not my favorite by any means from them, but the soundtrack is actually really enjoyable. Definitely one of the highlights of watching the film and listening to it on its own. I really liked it as well, so had to pick it up. Then we have the soundtrack to one of my favorite films of 2019, Ford v Ferrari. If you haven't seen it, it's really well done. Matt Damon, Christian Bale nail their roles, and if you like cars especially, it's definitely a treat for the eyes and ears. But the soundtrack has some really great moments in it as well, and so one that I'll love listening to. We've got an absolute classic soundtrack here with Vertigo by Bernard Herrmann, if that is the correct pronunciation. Obviously one of Hitchcock's great collaborators, who has worked on a ton of films other than his films, but definitely one of my favorite soundtracks out of Hitchcock's films. Next we have the soundtrack for the Safdie brothers breakout hit Good Time. I love the Uncut Gems soundtrack and have already picked that up and listened to it, but I definitely had to add Good Time as well. Both of the film soundtracks do such a good job at adding to the tension and constantly raising the stakes from an audio standpoint throughout the film, and so it's definitely a fun listen. Switching from movies to TV now, we have one of my favorite recent TV soundtracks, which is the soundtrack for Ozark Season 1 and 2. Got a great cover, obviously, keeping in theme with the show. And there's so many great tracks on here. If you love the show, this is an easy pickup. It's a pretty big surprise. I'm only just now adding this to the collection, but we've got the Inception soundtrack, one of my favorite soundtracks of all time by Hans Zimmer, one of my favorite composers. And so super excited to have this. My favorite track on here is probably Mombasa. That one is just pure adrenaline, but you can't go wrong with any of them. Next up, I'm getting very close to completing my Tarantino soundtrack collection, and we've got Kill Bill Volume 2 here. And Volume 1 is definitely my favorite of the two, but this one still has a lot of great moments on it, and Tarantino obviously hasn't had a bad soundtrack yet. Continuing on with the theme we've got going right now with movie soundtracks, we've got Free Guy next, and this isn't a score or anything, this is just music from the motion picture, and so it's just got all the songs that are featured, and sometimes that usually doesn't work for me because there will be a couple that I really like, but then some others where it works with little snippets in the film, but as a whole song I don't really enjoy them too much. But this one surprisingly has pretty much non-stop hits that I enjoy. Then we've got one of the all-time greats, Danny Elfman, killing it with Batman 89. And this soundtrack obviously is iconic. The theme is instantly recognizable, but the rest of the album is a fun time as well, so happy to have this one. Now, I already showed you Volume 1 before. Now we've got Volume 2 of the Breaking Bad soundtrack. Too many good hits in this show to not get all of the additions possible, and this is just all the score. There's obviously soundtracks that have the music from the show as well, and it pretty much all is great because everything about that show is perfect. Then we've got some work from my favorite Edgar Wright film. This is Volume 2 of the Baby Driver soundtrack, and this one is a really cool album. The way that they blend songs and dialogue snippets together, it's basically just like a shortened version of the movie from an audio perspective, so definitely recommend it, especially if you like the movie. Now, Breaking Bad isn't the only AMC show with music that I really love. I've got the Walking Dead soundtrack here, or a portion of it at least. There's quite a few editions of this that you can get, but this had a lot of the stuff that I like. And obviously the theme is iconic, definitely one of my favorite TV show themes. Next we've got the soundtrack for Alita Battle Angel. Love the movie, and the soundtrack is full of great stuff as well. Tom Holkenberg / Junkie XL hasn't made a bad soundtrack yet. I love all of his work. Then we've got one of my all-time favorite soundtracks. It was an instant favorite and it just keeps getting better every time I listen to it, but it is the soundtrack for Tenet. When Hans Zimmer was initially off the project, I was a little bit worried because obviously they are a perfect duo, but my worries were put to rest pretty quick, and at this point I would be fine if Ludwig and Christopher Nolan teamed up on all of their projects, because if they're putting out stuff like this, then I am all on board. And finally we have reached the last vinyl in this haul. There's even more than I previously expected, laying them all out like this, but it is a fun one to end on. It's the Napoleon Dynamite soundtrack, one of my favorite movies ever, one of my most watched movies as well, and one of the rare cases where a soundtrack that uses a lot of popular songs also has a really entertaining score. I love all the little things that they throw in there. It's just a great time from start to finish, and so really happy that I got this one. But hopefully you all enjoyed watching along with me as I unboxed all of these vinyl. Definitely let me know if you would like to see more of these. I'll probably do them regardless, but let me know your thoughts on the video, maybe which ones are your favorite that I showed. Let me know, especially if I recommended somebody to you, one of these artists, and you enjoyed them. I would love to hear that. But also, if you saw any of these and feel like there's an artist or particular genre that I'd really enjoy, you can also recommend that. Always looking for good new music, and clearly I'm not afraid to dedicate some time and money to discovering more music and to listening to it, so I always appreciate recommendations and stuff like that. But if you enjoyed this video, definitely consider leaving a thumbs up, really helps it out a lot. And if you'd like to support the channel more, definitely check out the Patreon, link for that is in the description below. But until the next video, look forward to seeing you all later. Peace.